Good afternoon and welcome today to the auditorium. Christine Ruiz Picasso of Ruiz Picasso Museum in Malaga. And welcome to all of you following us online. We start our fourth session of the seminar, International Seminar Surrealism and its Double, organized thanks to the to Unicaja as a sponsorship, which is a valuable ally for projects undertaken by the museum. Thank you to the University of Malaga. That is also one of our collaborators. And in this seminar, as well as in other initiatives, cultural, educative, training-wise, they walk hand in hand with us. Thank you to all the teams of the museums involved in this project that have contributed to make possible this seminar, as well as to all the technicians and interpreters, without whom we would not be able to fully enjoy all of these exciting information and knowledge that we're sharing. Along all the different sessions that we have developed the last weeks, we have tackled matters. We have discussed about surrealism, understood, reinterpreted along or during 100 years, the impact of surrealism in our modern days and nowadays has gone across disciplines and barriers and frontiers. There's been a figure that has overflown in all the sessions more sometimes, and it's always been present. The figure we are talking about, Picasso, who has a presence that is more relevant in today's session. And for that, we have with us two prestigious specialists in the matter, to which I would like to thank especially for being with us today, is Neil Cox and Eugenio Carmona, who, in addition, is co-director of this seminar. I would like to introduce briefly Mr. Cox and Mr. Carmona, although I'm sure that their parkour is well known by all of you. Neil Cox is the director of the Leonard A. Lauder Research Center for Modern Art at the Met in New York. Before joining the museum, he was professor of modern and contemporary art at the University of Edinburgh, and previously professor of art history and theory at the University of Essex. His publications include Cubism, the Picasso book, and he has last written about Braque, Picasso, aspects of surrealism, and the sculptures and drawing, and the drawings of Richard Serra. He has curated numerous exhibitions, including related to Picasso. Eugenio Carmona is part of the University of Malaga and a member of the programming committee at the board of trustees of the Museum of Malaga, Picasso Malaga. Has served as an advisor to the Museum, National Museum of Reina Sofia, and to the Casa Natal Picasso Museum. He has also served as artistic consultant for the Telefonica Foundation and the Mapfre Institute of Culture. He has also created international exhibitions and managed PhDs in Picasso and research projects focusing on Cubism, modern art, and 20th century Spanish art. In 1923, he curated Picasso 1906, The Great Transformation, and currently he's working on an exhibition he also curates, Picasso, Memory and Desire, opening mid-November in this museum. And if you are here present or listening to us, we invite you all to visit this wonderful new exhibition. Thank you to both of you. Without further ado, we give the floor to Mr. Cox, that will give a conference on the Cubism and the theater of cruelty. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes. I'm going to speak to you in English, so I don't know if you need headphones or not, but if you do, now's the time to get them. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the director of the museum, Miguel López Ramiro Focara, and Professor Eugenio Carmona, for the great honor to be invited to speak to you this evening. I'd also like to thank the team at the museum, who are wonderful, especially Ramon Melero Guerrero and Maria Jose Valverde, for their help. I'm grateful, very grateful, to the simultaneous translation team here tonight for their work in making my presentation in English accessible to you. The title of my talk may appear a little unusual as one of a series of lectures about Surrealism. It seems very easy to associate the idea of a theatre of cruelty, theorized by writer, actor, and artist Antonin Artaud in the 1930s, with some of the depictions of violence found in Picasso's Surrealist years, such as Woman with a Stiletto, for example. Yet this evening, I want to explore the possibility that this same violent and cruel character might be found in Picasso's Cubism as well. The second part of this lecture series title invites us to think about what the double of Surrealism might be. So I'm going to argue that Surrealism is Cubism's double. That might not be a surprise, given that I'll show how Surrealism was indebted to some aspects of Cubist criticism, as well as its art. A wide range of ideas and practices, including those that we normally think of as connecting Cubist and Surrealist art, such as collage, the use of found objects, complex visual fields of lines and planes, and ambiguous images. We might even say double images, in the spirit of this lecture series, underpin the doubling of the later movement in the earlier one. But today, I shall largely focus on this question of a shocking, perhaps cruel streak in Cubism, focusing on Picasso's work, and one work in particular. Taking account of ideas found in texts by André Breton and Guillaume Apollinaire, in the end, I shall return via Artaud to another kind of doubling that might apply to Picasso's Cubism and by extension to his Surrealism. It's one thing to say that Surrealism draws on aspects of Cubism, so doubling it, but it's another to think that Cubism is Surrealism's double, always already containing all of Surrealism's possibilities. In the winter of 1913-14, Picasso painted this very strange work, depicting a woman seated in an armchair and wearing only a chemise, holding a newspaper in one hand. It is one of the largest paintings of Picasso's Cubist period, surpassed in size by only a handful of works, including Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and The Three Women. The circumstances that led Picasso to paint this picture are well known. He moved to a new studio in Paris, in the Montparnasse district, 5 bis Rue Victor Schœlcher, in October 1913. His Cubist practice was in transition, moving from the so-called analytical cubism of 1909 to 11. I'm representing that, this thing on the left. Conventionally understood as a conceptual investigation of the multiple aspects of the three-dimensional world, to a more elemental practice from 1914 onwards of collage and the pasting of papers. Sorry, I should say 1912 onwards, of collage and the pasting of papers, including newspapers. This so-called synthetic cubism is sometimes colourful, sometimes comical, but always on the edge of construction, sculpture, as opposed to painting. The playing goes back and forth between the sculptural and the imitation of it as well. And even, as in this example on the right, the painted imitation of collage. Resonating suddenly with the urban visual culture, and everyday life, the turn in Cubism licenses further reinventions of things and of bodies. Always at stake in Picasso's Cubism are a series of tensions between the cerebral and the sensuous, the abstract and the concrete, sexual aggression and eroticism. This history of experiment and invention and these productive tensions in Picasso's Cubism underpin what we see in Woman in a Chemise in an Armchair. In a room indicated by roughly infilled areas of umber and brown, a woman sits in a flesh-coloured and heavily upholstered large chair with richly tufted arms and a pink fringe. Deep shadows are cast to the left around her head and shoulders, implying a light source that the rest of the picture dissimulates. We can discern waving strands of multicoloured hair to the left and right of her triangular head, and a raised arm revealing an armpit as if neatly combed. Beside the newspaper that she holds in her right claw-like hand, below her head appear schematic breasts. They combine in a dual perspective upturned pink nipples with brown nipples at the lower tips. This ostentatious demonstration of analytical cubism's lesson, see the object simultaneously from multiple viewpoints, ends up looking like medieval torture, as if breasts cut off were bizarrely nailed back into place. Below the breasts is a target-like navel, and underneath it, the chemise of the title, complete with broderie anglaise border. Hanging down from the body are two legs, with exaggerated knee joints and feet like animal hooves. As John Richardson pointed out, the folds of the chemise clearly and scurrilously allude to imagined bodily folds underneath. Richardson focuses his biographical account of the work on the idea that the painting is a kind of portrait of Picasso's lover at the time, Eva Goel, in part based on several more naturalistic drawings among the dozen or so preparatory studies for this work. Meanwhile, in her essay on the picture published in 2014, Emily Braun attempts to move beyond this narrow focus and discusses how Picasso situates it in a nexus, including Ingres' portraits of high society French women, cheap and soft pornographic photographs of artist models, and Picasso's long-standing interest in forms derived from African art, evident in that triangular face. Marshalling these forces, Braun argues, Picasso explores constructions of the idea of woman to produce a shocking work that still might deserve the epithet misogynist, but is nevertheless a striking and provocative achievement. Even though it has been widely morally debated in relation to its depiction of a woman, there are still some features of this work that are less remarked upon, and some of which are fantasy representations of practices found in collage. I'll attempt to describe them. The body of the woman is made up of a large, egg-shaped yellow plane that shifts to a grey colour near her head. Inside this envelope, there are several jostling brown planes and a large light grey one at the opposite angle. The neck is supported by this grey and also by a spinal column that is a sharp triangle. The central image of the body is a low curved plane, but on its right side are what looks like ribs, while on the left a hollow in the grey plane issues in a brown rod that seems to hold up the chemise. A scalloped shape is at the bottom right, in a more orange-brown hue that picks up on the colours near the breasts. This woman, then, is built in part from the same jostling planes that Picasso's paintings, drawings, collages, and sculptures deploy for quite different representations. I can even convince myself that this woman is also in part the shapes and hollows of a musical instrument. A watercolour and gouache of 3 years later might confirm this. Here we see a woman playing a guitar, but the guitar becomes very much part of her bodily structure. Or indeed, at more of a stretch, the cardboard guitar of 1912, which was in the studio when Picasso was making his large painting. And of course, that triangular shape at the top is striking in this respect. For sure, the association of guitar and women has a long history and can take us straight back to Richardson, Pierre Daix, and others, who all too readily connect Picasso's Cubist representations of the guitar to a perceived association with Gouel's body and Picasso's erotic interest in it. My point here is different and has to do with a conceptual oscillation from a still life to a body and back again. The Cubist practices of dissembling and reassembling produce an image barely embodying presence that are common to both. Now, the leader of the Surrealist movement, launched in 1924, André Breton, greatly admired and celebrated Woman in a Chemise in an Armchair in his 1925 text on Picasso, the first installment of his series of essays, Surrealism and Painting, which were eventually published in book form. When we were children, we had toys that would make us weep with pity and anger. One day, perhaps, we shall see the toys of our whole life spread before us, like those of our childhood. It was Picasso who put this idea in my mind, the woman with a chemise of 1914. I'll come back later to this passage about the painting. But Breton also mentions another work in this passage of the same text that has a different mood. We leave behind us the great grey beige scaffoldings of 1912, the most perfect example of which is Man with a Clarinet. Parallel existence must remain a subject for endless meditation. This word, scaffoldings, is particularly evocative of Cubism around 1911 to 12, catching as it does the feeling that what we see is almost an improvised architecture of the body. replete with angles, nodes, and diaphanous planes. The equally poetic parallel existence, on the other hand, is less tied to the appearance of the painting, alluding instead to the possible world that might include such a being as this, whose elusive, mystifying presence seems to come from elsewhere than quotidian reality. So much for the Bretonian reading of Picasso's Cubism as surrealist. In fact, that connection goes back further in the history of the avant-garde, given that the term surrealist was invented, first coined by the poet critic Guillaume Apollinaire in the context of his surrealist drama, Les Mamelles de Tiresias, or the Breasts of Tiresias, staged in June 1917. Apollinaire used the word surrealism in his preface to the play, which he intended to challenge the realisms of contemporary theatre. Much later, of course, Picasso would claim that he coined the term surrealism and Apollinaire stole it from him. I'm sure that's not true. Apollinaire was a tireless proponent of new art, especially Cubism, in the years before the First World War. He promoted two ideas about modern art, and Cubism in particular. First, that it represented all the vivid new features of modern life, including advertising, newspapers, cinema, ocean liners, airplanes, street signs, and so on. Second, that the essential feature of modern art was what he called surprise, by which he meant a powerful artistic imagination and invention, leading to an art that produces, and this is the important point, perpetually new truths. Such truths were not about common sense or objective knowledge, however. Surprise was manifest, Apollinaire tells us, in authentic falsehoods, palpable phantoms, the beings that it begets, and the changes that it produces. Surprise is a doctrine that eventually led to Apollinaire to invent Surrealism in 1917. Clearly, it means something rather different in comparison with Breton's version of the idea described in his manifesto of Surrealism in 1924. Now, Apollinaire first began developing his notion of surprise in response to early Cubism, and especially the work of Picasso. The way he does this is itself fascinating and important for thinking about how Picasso belonged to his conceptions and how Picasso may have absorbed and also encouraged such ideas. In the essay that opens Apollinaire's book, The Cubist Painters of 1913, he writes, "Above all, artists are men who wish to become inhuman. They painstakingly search for traces of inhumanity, traces which are nowhere encountered in nature. Such traces are the truth, and beyond them we know no reality." How should we understand that strange claim? The idea of becoming inhuman is linked here to an artistic quest to overcome natural or everyday appearance, and instead to find truth in traces of inhumanity, which for Apollinaire is the only reality we can know. Though remember that this truth is to be understood oxymoronically as authentic falsehood. Inhumanity is what is beyond everyday human perceptions. Looking at this still life by Picasso from 1911 might help. It rejects the conventions for representing three-dimensional objects in space that had long dominated the Western European artistic tradition. That something is before us is clear, but it emerges out of a web of lines and marks, concentrated in the center, but with no verifiable bounded shapes. and no clear distinction between things, such as they seem to appear, and surrounding space. From Apollinaire's perspective, perhaps such traces of things are closer to the truth, that is the new reality, than the established tradition of painting ever could be. Certainly other early critics of Cubism saw it in this way as conceptual rather than perceptual, as striving to show what we might know about reality instead of what we believe we see. Yet Apollinaire's point is more that this picture surprises us with another kind of imaginary world, changing reality. The implication is that every work of modern art produces a different, new reality. Apollinaire had another simile for getting at the inhuman and the artistic quest for it. He thought of the modern artist as akin to a surgeon. Mathematics and surgery, they share an objective, intellectual, and perhaps cold attitude to their material. The turn of phrase used to describe Picasso here is very striking, particularly bearing in mind when he first drafted it in 1908, Apollinaire had seen a lot of Picasso's early Cubist figure paintings, including Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He studies an object, like a surgeon dissecting a cadaver. This last work, the 1908-9 Bather, now in New York, is unlike the other works I showed you just now, which were still life paintings. These two. Remember that Apollinaire is thinking of Picasso dissecting an object, not a person, like or as if a surgeon dissecting a cadaver. Yet the metaphor readily takes us back to the territory with which we began, the representation of the figure, and especially the female figure in Picasso's Cubism, and its oscillation with object-like forms, musical instruments. This Bather is a kind of demonstration piece of the combination of viewpoints, multiple viewpoints in a single aspect. Hence, the buttocks turn around so that we can see the cleft between them. The left shoulder also improbably twists into view. The shoulders curl round. The breasts turn into diamond shapes, and the left leg bends into an animal form. The whole thing is cadaverous in tone. As Picasso drains natural colour out of depictions. Whatever form of surprise this is, it is, like the work that set Picasso on this road in summer 1907, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, deliberately provocative and scandalous. This literal current of dissection seems to be present too in Woman in a Chemise in an armchair with her exposed rib cage, echoing in turn here a sketchbook drawing made close to the same time in Notebook 26, possibly representing a male rather than a female figure. In Picasso's art, Apollinaire implies, people get treated as objects, and these objects get dissected, rearranged, made thoroughly inhuman in the quest for a kind of shock, an authentic falsehood that forces us close to a feeling for a new reality. No doubt Picasso internalized Apollinaire's radical notion of surprise as a shock effect of an art of false truths. Since in 1923, he pronounced in an interview this widely cited dictum. Picasso said, "Art is a lie that makes us realize truth." How seriously can we take this comparison with a surgeon? In a series of paintings made in Horta de San Juan, which you see here in 1909, of a woman seated, Picasso explores the anatomy of the neck, head, breasts, via a confounding pattern of light and dark, where shapes seem to be at one moment receding and another to push forward in space. We know that this quest for a kind of crumpling density led to sculpture. The jostling planes that by 1912 came to comprise bodies in Picasso's art represents them as things in a deliberately estranging world. There's one further mention of the idea that Picasso's approach to representation is like that of a surgeon. But this one is a particularly dark one in mood. The idea of dying came to Picasso as he was watching his best friend's worriedly jocking circumflex eyebrows. And then anatomy, for example, had to be reinvented, and the artist had to assassinate himself as scientifically and methodically as a great surgeon. The focus here is on the reinvention of anatomy, a practice, of course, long allied to academic training in art, but which for the modern artist, Apollinaire tells us, requires overcoming all conventions and rigorously destroying the legacy of those conventions in himself, i.e. in the artist, discovering instead an entirely new understanding of the human body. In analysing Women in a Chemise, we've already seen how the body of a woman is subject to a combination of willful deformation and cubist assemblage, like an object. These tendencies occur frequently in Picasso's drawings in the same period. But this discourse of a new anatomy finds expression in many different forms throughout what can be called Picasso's Surrealist period, roughly 1925 to 34. A series of sketchbook drawings of bizarre constructed forms appeared in the first issue of the Surrealist journal Minotaur in 1933, with the title An Anatomy. Carefully rendered in the language of illustration, these bricolage creatures seem to stand together on a platform, shore, or even a stage. It's unclear whether they are living monsters or preparations for experiments by a mad sculptor. Their apparently self-supporting forms suggest that they are living bodies. I've been talking about the metaphor of the surgeon as applied to Picasso's Cubist art by Apollinaire, and the objectivity of intellectual attitude, coolness, and even perhaps cruelty that it implies as essential dispositions for the radical modern artist as an agent of surprise and shock, transforming the real. In comparison, Breton's take in his 1925 text on Picasso seemed very different. But if I now reveal how that paragraph ends, there is a hint of the same idea of a deliberately cruel attitude and the need to shock in order to change the sense of reality. I'll pick up from where we left off. We grow up until a certain age, it seems, and our playthings grow up with us, playing a part in a drama whose only theatre is the mind. Picasso, creator of tragic toys for adults, has obliged man to grow up, and sometimes, under the guise of exasperating him, put an end to his puerile fidgeting. The puerile fidgeting here refers to clinging to old toys, the conventions, let's say, of literature and art, the comforting notions of poetry and of realist academic painting, and the world of bourgeois self-belief that these cultural practices confirm. Picasso, Breton says, does things to exasperate this worldview, and so detonates it. All this happens in a drama whose only theatre is in the mind. This is the stage on which Breton imagines Picasso performs these infuriating, grotesque soliloquies. Apollinaire, it'll be recalled, invented the word surrealism to describe his play, Les Mamelles de Tiresias. The preface that he wrote for the programme insists that his surrealist drama is meant to renew the theatre, which he believes has fallen into a moribund state. Choosing not to write a play to flatter the tastes of the general public, who merely believe themselves intelligent, he instead aims to create something new that may cause shock and indignation, but will appear meaningful to those with true insight. So, the question of the theatre and a modern art that radically reinvents the notion, either metaphorically for Breton or literally for Apollinaire, was central to another figure in the orbit of Surrealism, Antonin Artaud. Artaud was a close friend of Surrealist painters André Masson and Joan Miro, who met in the early 1920s. He was briefly strongly involved in the early years of the movement founded by Breton as the secretary of the Bureau for Surrealist Research, but was expelled by Breton in 1927. Artaud had attempted to publish some of his writings even before meeting the Surrealists, and had also already been under treatment in hospitals and asylums for mental illness. This continued on and off for the rest of his life. It was in this context that in 1938 he published a collection of his essays, letters and notes under the title The Theatre and Its Double, which introduced a manifesto, The Theatre of Cruelty, a conception for which he's now most famous. But what did he intend by that striking formulation, the theatre of cruelty? Notably, I missed a sentence, for which he's now famous. What did he intend when he landed on it in 1932? Notably, Artaud insisted that it was not meant to suggest sadism and blood, but rather the cruelty of existence, the suffering that characterizes it, everything, he said, with agency, everything that acts in the world is cruelty. That includes all of you and me. We're all cruelty. Glossing this idea further in one of the letters concerning cruelty published in his book, he expands on this point. There is a kind of elemental wickedness within the flame of life, the appetite for life, the irrational impulse toward life. Each stronger life passes through others, so devouring them in a slaughter that is both transfiguration and beneficial. In the visible world, metaphysically speaking, evil enjoys permanent rule. Artaud thus imagined a corporeal theatre, not one dominated by texts of plays, but by visuals, rhythmic movements, sound and light. His model was not conventional theatre, which he railed against in terms that echo but surpass Apollinaire. Instead, he argued that modern art and music opened avenues to imagine a reborn theatre. In a letter to Pierre Jouvet, for example, he wrote that no modern play offers the stage equivalent of a de Chirico painting. So this idea of a surrealist painting by de Chirico is more, exciting than any kind of theatre that existed in Artaud's time. Hence his need to overthrow it, modernize it, transform it, to match the achievements of modern art and modern music. This preoccupation with modern art did not find an obvious position in the theatre in its double. Instead, in an amazing essay entitled Staging and Metaphysics, Artaud focused on a Flemish painting in the Louvre that was then assumed to be by Lucas van Leyden, and he'd stumbled upon it in September 1931. In an extended reading of the painting, Artaud contrasts the world of Lot and his daughters, including the plight of the ships at sea and other figures in the landscape, with the fire that he sees descending from the sky. That's, of course, the destructive fire rained down by God on Sodom. Artaud sees this fire as giving off a sense of agency and evil intent. Remember, everything that acts is cruel. Finally, Artaud reads this picture as portraying through its visual form such metaphysical concepts as becoming, fate, and chaos. As such, he says, it represents everything that the theatre should be if it spoke its own language. So it's a little bit like what he says about De Chirico, but peculiarly he does it with a Netherlandish painting. In his notes for this essay, the essay he wrote about this, Staging and Metaphysics, there's one further striking formulation that touches on both the meanings of modern art and the possibility of a theatre of cruelty. He says, quote, "The most beautiful art is the one that brings us closest to chaos." It goes into note form. Idea of instability of forms of our condition. So somehow the instability of forms in modern art would also be the instability of our condition. Artaud's own trajectory, one of personal suffering and mistreatment at the hands of doctors, also led him increasingly to resort to making drawings and paintings alongside writing letters. These drawings incorporated languages and were replete, when I say languages, they're invented languages, and were replete with his own mythic and fantasy inventions, such as, here you see the 6 hearts' daughters to be born, who appear in a 1947 drawing showing them in coffins, inscribed with the title, The Theatre of Cruelty. Often, the drawings were stabbed with a pencil, punctured by burns and rubbed too hard. Such practices by Artaud, this kind of aggressive treatment of the drawing surface, were partly the exercise of a kind of bodily violence, but they're also a therapeutic kind of ritual of the exorcism of that cruelty and suffering. Certainly, Artaud saw his own body as a kind of vehicle for the absorption of violence and suffering. If Artaud's drawing practice was itself a kind of body and also a theatre of cruelty, this was an echo of the way he understood what theatre could be in its relation to life as a double. If the theatre doubles life, then life doubles the true theatre, the reservoir of energies that constitute myths that are no longer incarnated by people, are incarnated by theatre. By this double, I mean that great magical power of which the theatre, in the forms it adopts, is only the representation, in waiting for it to become the transfiguration of power. As I've argued, if Picasso's Cubism is the double of his Surrealism, it's because Picasso's art, Cubist art, created false truths, phantoms of new realities. Artaud draws in another notion, that the most beautiful art harbours chaos. This chaos, I think, arose out of Cubism and lingered to suddenly erupt in Picasso's surrealist practice over and over again. By the potent force of chaos in art, Artaud did not mean arbitrariness or incoherence, but I think the same convincing shock of new form that Apollinaire first called surprise. This surrealist woman in an armchair repeats many of the motifs from the 1913 painting with which I began. She's in a bourgeois room and seated in a plausible armchair against wallpaper and wainscoting. But here, she's more animalistic, more like a living monster, shadowed by strange profiles that close in on her body. Seeing this against Artaud's drawing of his spirit guides in their coffins shifts its meaning a little further, perhaps, in the direction both of the estranging body, itself subject to cruelty, to self-annihilation and magical exorcism. Artaud's Nietzschean argument is that theatre must be a holding place for the lost mythic sensibility that once, he supposes, bound people to the power and energy of cruel existence. Woman in a chemise in an armchair of 1913 has many doubles, like this one. They blur the line between thing and person. They exist as if performers from a theatre of cruelty, a parallel universe where the instability of forms matches the plight of the modern condition. In this sense, Picasso doubles surrealism. But like Artaud's theatre of cruelty, it also doubles life. And like Artaud, Picasso's processes of finding these infinite anatomies via what Apollinaire calls self-annihilation, the fateful need to refuse good form and to reflect the cruel, sometimes led him to attack the very forms on which his art depended, to annihilate painting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox, for your wonderful conference. We are going to make a small break, and we will be back in the half an hour at 6 o'clock, or 6:15, sorry. See you in a little while.
We resume the session of today of Picasso, the other, with a conference by Eugenio Carmona, who will talk about the magic, from magic paintings to psychogram. Thank you.
I'm sorry, the microphone is not connected. Welcome to this second conference. We're getting close to Picasso, to Surrealism. And thank you to Neil Cox, because this listening to him has been difficult. To those of us that Neil has spoken to the most difficult work of Picasso, and the result has been wonderful. The explanations of Neil has been wonderful. Dear friends, the monster is looking at you. It's looking at us. These works were carried on Picasso in 1928. The title is, well, the titles are always in Picasso, but it's a Faber collection, has been for a long time in this museum. One does never know and will never know why certain works of art fascinate incessantly when we contemplate them. And there is a point where, after researching a lot and dealing with them, one prefers knowing less, and for the works to keep fascinating us, to keep and to preserve all these feelings of fantasy, of being kidnapped visually along our lives, and not to find so many meanings. Regardless of that, there is a circumstance in front of these works. I had the luck some years ago, in 2021, to create in the Termica in Bienal Sur for the Chilean artist Voluspa Harpa, that came recently from Venice, the Biennale. Very successfully, she has been in the Chilean pavilion, and she was very engaged with the situation as a woman artist, with her social engagement with the arts, and with the reconsidering the memory, the shock of cultures, or the meeting of cultures. And the exhibition in Malaga was extremely brave and courageous, because she was discussing the colonialism and the human zoo. The contact we established raised, as being in Malaga, the possibility she wanted to visit Picasso. And for me, it was a challenge, because as we know, Picasso has suffered and comes and goings in assessments, in the valuations, and visiting with an artist such as Voluspa, so contemporaneous, and with the encounter with politics and art and the thoughts, post-colonial thoughts, feminist thoughts, was for me a challenge that I accepted, because I realized that I could only learn from her, because she was proving that in Malaga during the whole stay. I was fascinated that she was interested by the same works as me, and we established a connection that will remain in time, and that made me reflect. I remember we spoke about these works, and we spoke about the dimensionality of this piece. How can it be carried by someone? It wasn't as small that he disappears as a physical object, and it wouldn't be as big as it would be external to us. At the same time of the dimensionality, she was interested deeply on the trait, and he has done this and this with these traits and with these lines, and you could listen and how the brush, a flat brush, will make this sound of chess going on the canvas. You have to be very precise with that. He was a virtuosist. He couldn't go wrong, because he had to do it from the end to the beginning and right in one go. We discussed as well how it was a pictogram and ideogram, the background work. And when I mentioned why this feminine figure, why, She said to me, "And why do you think it's a woman? And what do you base yourself to consider is a woman?" The monster in Spanish is a masculine gender word. So there will be a translation to a gender that should make us reflect really in the history of Western cultures. Many figures related to the consciousness of man, of the heterodetermined male, are represented as feminine figures. The Iranians, the Furies, and to call them with not to make them angry, they were called Eumenides. And this painting of Hugh, he was prosecuted by his own guilt because he killed his sister, and they were screaming at him. They were opening their mouths and with the fingers full of and the hair full of snakes in front of the person that was feeling guilty. In the Western culture, allegories of the feminine figure have served so much as to represent the inheritors of Lilith and Eva, like Eneka Bornai proved to us, and to positive figures like the freedom, the justice. In our language, we could discuss progress is masculine, but knowing how to know this differentiation is difficult. And without reflecting on this quality of the Western culture of personifying, embodying in women certain values, culturally and psychologically identified, this painting of Picasso with the look of the Medusa. I was fascinated by her gaze, and I wanted to go back to the fact that it was always reminding me to the famous head that turns in the Demoiselle d'Avignon, that is always related to a mask, to an African mask. I was always fascinating for a reason, that it was Medusa for a reason. In Picasso, the Minotaur and the monster simultaneously appear. Being petrified is the commonplace of all of them, and the look of Medusa petrifies those in front of her. But in historiography, it had gone in another direction. Historiography and in works that have been presented with a lot of clashes in places like in the Museum Picasso and in Paris, they identify the figure of the monster with the figure of relevant women in the life of Picasso. I always wonder if this wouldn't be a misogynist look, if it wouldn't be a misogynist look coming from a patriarchal society deeply heteronormatized. When a portrait of Olga is Olga, it looks like Olga, and it will be Olga. When a portrait of Marie-Thérèse has the features of Marie-Thérèse, it will be Marie-Thérèse. But when it's an ideogram, when it's an abstract figure, something brought from the imagination, what do we base on that the monster is Olga or the monster is Marie-Thérèse? And finally, is it Olga or is it Marie-Thérèse the monster? Wouldn't that be a contradiction in terms? I think the biographic method doesn't work really. It's not that I'm gonna be against it, but you need it for Picasso. But maybe there are alternatives, other ways of presenting things and not being kidnapped rapidly for commonplaces that, in my view, and at my age, I have a right to give you my view, that doesn't support so clearly as we are trying to make us believe. On this painting, I have to quote, and the presentation of this book, Timothy Clark, that has also been in the Picasso, he wrote things that are very interesting that I will go back to. But in reality, I believe that faced to these paintings at present, the fact, historiographically, the way we have to explain this, to relate them to the to articles, as I said, with Christian Servos, published in '38, where he spoke about these works of Picasso and that how we classify these works in that way. I would like to do something different, though. I would like to compare the criteria of these works of Christian Servos with Carl Einstein, the famous theoretician of the German art Cubist expert to a depth that only Cambayan could know how to appreciate, who knew very well Juan Gris and Picasso's works. And the magazine documents he published in the 30s a text where he related with the works of Picasso through in another way with psychograms and psychography concepts. I don't want to cancel Cervo's proposals. In the recent exhibition that I did in Madrid, Picasso 1906, one of the central main concepts to speak about James Jamat on the primitive art was based on Cervos. And I don't want to leave to be carried out by the seduction of Einstein in many of us because of his tragic end, his engagement with the arts and with a progressive art. I want to be balanced. Simply, I'm interested in his arguments. I want to face them. In reality, when we speak on the Tableau Magique, we offer, there is a historiographic proposal that Cervos never wanted to mention. The title is suggestive, but Cervos offers in his action an enormous diversity of reference. His thesis is more poetic than historical or critical or epistemological. There are works missing that later are considered as tableau magique at a later stage, but they were not in that text of Cervos. And I wanted to do a narrative on the works, but to present Picasso in a new way when he had been years doing it on the magazine Cahiers d'Art. When you look into Cervos, to use the logo, the slogan he used to christen these paintings, you don't talk about substantial aspects that Cervos very clearly explains in his text, in his article. For example, Cervos, he says that these works of Picasso are agents sovereign of dynamism, of psychical dynamism. What a sentence. He's wanted to tell us that they are creations of the mind. Clearly, Cervos says this, not Einstein needs to say that before. He wants to tell us that Picasso wishes with this to reach the absolute extreme of the desire. And this is something that Cocteau always said about Picasso. The obsession he had was on desire as an absolute. And at the same time, he said that to be able to work in this sense, he needs to reduce his images to the condition of sign, symbol. Therefore, the idea, the basic idea of Cervos and the idea of Einstein is not so far, but the historiography has separated them in time. At the same time, Cervos tells us, literally, when Picasso paints a woman, he builds a representation in general of a figure that later will be something very different of the woman that could have inspired the artist. Cervos himself clarifies this from the beginning. And Einstein, in the magazine Document number 3, second year, very significant magazine, as we are talking about surrealism, this issue was essential because Georges Bataille published there, and he gave access to a new conception of surrealism. Einstein tells us that Picasso gives us the keys for the engagement of our times with the freedom, the absolute freedom. And he only wants to paint what's psychologically true. That psychograms, passive ones of intuition, are not worth it for him any longer. And that his shapes have a genesis, a psychographic genesis, a mantic one, like if they were in the land of the admiration. And with his article, they reproduce a series of works that go in depth into this reflection. Einstein created this concept slowly, and documents translate a part, modified, because I verified this, of some of his books on history of the arts of the 20th century. The first one is from the year 26, and there we discuss about this Kandinsky has psychographies. And in 28, they talk about psychography and psychogram. In the article of the year 30, they concentrate on Picasso. And on the publication on the year 31 of the book, they talk about psychograms, but he still uses psychography. The Van Gogh, Léger and Gris, they don't use psychograms, but what they want to say is that Picasso is not the only author that does psychograms, but he also makes the psychograms, or the optical ones, that are more powerful of his time. That means that Einstein doesn't invent the concept of psychogram or psychography for Picasso. He reaches the conclusion that who creates the more powerful ones is Picasso, and therefore the concept in him has a specific repercussion and is specifically relevant and revealing. And we can wonder if the psychogram is a graphism of the psyche. Can it be the representation of a subject outside to the one created the psychogram, but a representation of another one that's inside the subject? Because otherwise it's not a psychogram. And then you are reaching the conclusion by yourself. If you cannot be representing someone, but only the interior of whoever is doing the psychogram, then the monster is... Right. Einstein adds another item. The shades in Picasso are not a double, but many of the emanations of man, reflection of himself, because the contemporary subject is Janus, and the contemporary subject is two-faced and is splitted. And this is the relation of the Picasso works. He's wanting to tell us that in some works of Picasso, there is a figure of a monster. The monster and the figure are the double face of Janus, the same subject expressed in two different ways. From this perspective, we could take back the history of psychogram, and I think we should become an art historian, and in a very relaxed manner, and remember that Picasso was a great painter of the passions of the soul. The passions of the soul were treated by Charles Le Brun, the painter of the kingdom of the absolute monarchy of France, trying to codify and classify for painting that the expressions of the passions. And Picasso was very attentive to Le Brun in many occasions. Le Brun carried out several still lifes with the elogies of the greatness of the arts. We are very interested in this still art of 28. Elizabeth Collin and Neil Cost, they said they represent a version of Picasso on the greatness of the art. The Passions of the Soul had many editions, his book, and after his death he was edited in French, in English, in German, and there is a list here of all the passions represented. Fortunately, it was an illustrated book, and with illustrations we can rethink the works we are interested in. What does it look like? Does it look like desire? And in principle it does, because of the shape of the eyes standing out in the woman, looking incessantly like the figure, and the mouth that opens also represents the same way the acute pain or disdain or horror and overall fear. This relation with a figure to the other is the one I'm more interested in. The monster looks at us, and that should make us feel afraid. But if we follow the passions of the soul and we identify Picasso as a painter that knew a lot about classic painting, and on the course of representation that surely his father taught him because he was an expert in the subject, this figure is afraid. And fear makes us feel fearful, and is a monster, but not a monster that comes for us to destroy us. But fear that we feel about fear is to feel the decomposition of the figures we feel afraid, or see afraid. Also anger, and it represents as well hate and jealousy. We had a spectrum in what circle of representation Picasso is that would close with desperation. That is the representation of anguish, of extreme anguish, with there is no other place beyond what he wanted to represent. From there, we can have different narratives in his works that would take us to identify the figure we're interested in, the picture we're interested in, that will make us speak about it or discuss about it. But all narrative on the works of Picasso is condemned to fail because his works are so large and powerful that any narrative can melt in the face of another alternative narrative. So we only have left the thought that whatever we propose is a proposal, subjective, and that we need to objectivize and a possibility, never a truth. Never will we be able to write about Picasso. This is the truth about Picasso. We can make many suggestions, interpretations of his works. We can trade narratives and create narratives and considerations that may seem as revelations, but that's all. What I'm going to give you is one possibility right now, but not the truth about Picasso or the only narrative which is possible, not what I can build. Firstly, is a bit trying to think that Picasso was living always outside of the world, in his own labyrinth, in his mind, psychological, sexual mind. He's reaching, when we get to the 20s, a specific age. He's starting to discard, to deal with surrealism with me, my students of the University of Malaga. When you become older, as we all do, you will see how behind you there are new generations, and you realize that are going to replace you. And then you cannot be in the place, continue the place you were. They speak a lot about my youth in the 90s, in Madrid, in Malaga, in London, wherever. But many of you were not born in the 90s. Therefore, the generation replacement is there. Surrealists were younger than Picasso. Therefore, when they invited him to his event, he was to be aware that he was opening a new time in his life, a different time, as Neil Cox explained before, redefine the whole of his works. I'm even made of cubism, a kind of surrealism that no one could expect, but at the same time dividing these seasons on the happy 20s and the difficult 30s. In Russia, Stalin had finished with the avant-garde art. In Italy, there's the fascine, and Novecento is going back to the needs of the Duce. In 23 is the Punch of Munich of Hitler, and then we have fascism arriving, and the crisis in France is terrible. The Ring River is in demonstrations. There's a Primo de Rivera dictatorship. We never think about this, but with the Primo de Rivera dictatorship, Juan Gris knew that he could not come ever back to Spain, and Picasso, it was difficult for him. And even if he came back many times, it was something that make you consider yourself from the condition of expat in France. And even though you were involved very much, he was very much involved in the French culture. On top of that, let's not forget this is a time, it's not all negative, of the emancipation of the women, where for the first time we start talking about homosexuality in the arts and in culture. We publish in the main magazines about the subject. The freedom of the anarchists reach on many areas of the society, and there are new behaviors socially accepted, and there is massively widespread. And when Ortega y Gasset, his legacy is enormous, is the revolution of the masses. Masses revealed and start, and in Europe, the birth of the mass society, we can see it by the presence of North Americans in France after the First World War that bring all the cultural codes different from the European ones. In 23, Picasso painted some of his big classic works, but the relationship with people such as the Murphy relationship reminded him his bohemian times. He's a bourgeois bohemian. He's a bit of a snob, and he reminds him in this alternative life he left behind. As I said, the presence of the culture, Afro-American culture in Paris, not only North America, but as Daniel Maximin shared, the Caribbean one, despite having a hidden supremacism with touches and with being assessed in different ways, is the other on the Parisian land. So references of where Miro was closer to Josephine Baker and the Nadal confrontations within sector of the negritude was a real revolution. Josephine Baker was used by the avant-garde, the banana dance and the little skirt. Jean Cocteau created this skirt. Nadal's sister thought it was a manipulation, it was terrible of negritude. But it was a tension created that changed deeply the system, culturally speaking, in Europe. The Dadaists were knocking on the door. This magazine is in the Picasso Paris Museum. Here in the session of Leclerc Barbe, Pierre de Massot stood up and said, Pablo Picasso, Pablo Picasso, Pablo Picasso. And nobody answered. He stated, Pablo Picasso is dead in the battlefield. And then André Breton stood up, and in public he suppressed the discourse of Massot. Well, I don't know how he thought about that, but he broke his arm with his umbrella. I don't know if that was a surrealist reaction, or method, but what happened? That Pierre Caban and other biographists of Picasso think that John Richardson, Picasso, thought it was very funny and he didn't care and he had no sense thinking anything else beyond that. But it was the first time that from the frame of the avant-garde they were questioning Picasso. A questioning that sometimes Picasso expressed
representing himself as an harlequin that looks himself in the mirror and doubts about his vanity and about his own narcissism. André Breton came triumphantly into this new relationship with Picasso, but cannot be considered the presence of Breton in Picasso's life without considering that Cocteau is still present, and they're both in year 23 want to seduce Picasso. Picasso, evil and very astute. He used the triangulation as a psychological effect, which is well known. Nothing that the ego grows of a man heterosituated when thinking that two are fighting for you. Therefore, the confrontation between Breton and Cocteau was well known, and therefore Picasso encouraged this situation of different elements. But in the Arts magazine, he made some statements that make him think about, reflect what was the sense of the arts. He used symbols where the confrontation of the horse and the bull, where Brice and Miro were on the scene with the plastics, and the second with the transformation paintings. Because it was not the only Spanish one on the scene, there were others. The Demoiselle d'Avignon, as the plan with Breton didn't work, trying to say to the roof, it ended up being a decorative painting in the Doucet, the fashion maker. In the Surrealist magazine, it was depicted as a revolutionary work, and it was contradictions all over. Picasso started to paint the formlessness, the curved shapes, the lyric shapes, and the formless concept in the Winnicott means that the person that approaches it is someone that wishes to go back to the beginning. The Harlequin of Picasso, he has a double face, and as in Picasso's works, there are some proposals, small proposals, that are seeds that will flower and grow later in 24, the spring of 24. Picasso uses the sitting woman icono theme, start to paint it double face, profiles on shade. And we can take these double faces and these shade faces as a cubist element like Therbostis, or we can take those as psychological forces that require an explanation, something that Carl Einstein will request. I'm going to go towards the second option, because representing the drawings of Mercure in the Picasso's work, we see a small drawing in a little piece of paper that will end up
scribble, and he preserved it because he kept everything, and up to present it's being preserved, and you can see the first monster face. Effectively, is a woman, and as you can see, she has the mouth dented, the eyes remind you the masculine genitals, which is a sliding of the gender, the hair like snakes, representing the horror. All the characteristics and the features of the 28 figures are here in this small drawing of 24. 4 years working the same subject is a long time in the life and the works of Picasso. Plus, over 100 and something works related to this means something. This is the compulsion of repetition. And when an artist and someone is possessed by the compulsion of repeating an item, that means that something powerful of encounter with the real, with the definitive is in his of her works. The Harlequin Picasso started to double the face and to become sexual. The feminine figures divide the face into positive and negative to express the duality of the subject. And there are feminine figures that remind us to the iconotype of Marie-Thérèse Balder, but they couldn't be Marie-Thérèse Balder on that date. So for Picasso, this icon was pre-created before it appeared in his life. So we need to go. And that's why these works have to be the face. The feminine faces keep the genitality inscription like both sexes could melt into one. The areas in white will repeat. And in some compositions, when the figure is in front and on the side, we can think that it's an inheritance of the Cubism as a representation resource to represent two dimensions. Or maybe there is a figure that comes from we don't know where and comes and kisses the other figure, the feminine figure that plays the guitar, containing representations of the desire. The bust becomes to appear then in the bust, and when in small drawings, the shades are related to the bust. It's inscribed in some compositions like this one, where the still life has been invaded by the ochre darkness, and in the dance, as being identified like the footprint of Ramon Pichot, we had a normative reading of the works that when Picasso created it, and this is what Palau says, it was not in the mind of Picasso, this kind of creations. The dance, in reality, is a picture within a picture, and it includes two paintings. One, the general one, and another one, the one of the monster figure, related gesturally with a profile on shade. Picasso is repeating incessantly. The dance is related to the vacants, to the polyristic demons, to the hysteric women of Charcot, to some primitive art, to the dance of Josephine Baker. All of that, and doubtless, might be true. And there are interpretations, suggestive interpretations, but the likeness with the monster dance and the small drawing of 24 is revealing that there was, and it takes us to the conclusion that there was something in the mind of Picasso before getting to this point. The bust keeps appearing, even transforms mysteriously. These works of the Reina Sofia works, if you notice, the eyes of the bust are the eyes of the figure. The brushes are the ones used of the hair in black. The palette looks like a mouth devorating in some ways the shape of the face, because it's working the same idea that transforms from a figurative painting to an ideogram, to a psychogram, we could say in this case. And in the summer of 25, this explodes. This Picasso proves in his pictures that he had a stay very happy in Saint-Jean-le-Pen, has very dramatic works. On one side, he sexualizes the figure or he proposes still lifes like the one we mentioned, and in the head of a goat is one of his slogans where he establishes. And these works are specifically meaningful because of the presence of the shade, and because it's a tribute to the art from himself. We want to see the footprint of his father as a art professor. In the bust, we can see the presence of his dad. Like in architecture, we see the presence of his son. With a correlation in general, take us for Picasso. This is a manifesto works like John Esteban would have called an internal revelation, internal revolution. He's calling back his past to redefine it, and the bust becomes a main character, and with the shades adding features that have a polyphacetic and various meaning. The shade is the invention of the painting. The shade is in the source of the drama, in the German expressionist cinema. The shade is in Carl Jung, that inside us that we don't dare to socialize because it prevents us the relation with the others, whether it is a positive quality, whether it's a negative one. But the shade can also be the presence of divinity. Remember this work of Masaccio, of St. Peter curing the ill with his shade only. The duality of criteria is there. And the Natalie has the après coup, a posteriori effect in his works. In his academic work, he had drawn busts with shades and busts where the representation became suddenly dramatic. Picasso is quoting himself and quoting Seneca. Many historians have translated this bust in many ways. Lydia Gasma, she did a parkour, enormous one. But from Seneca, what interests Picasso on why is the Stoic philosophies with his tragic death, the one that interests Picasso at that point in time, will take us another hour. So I invite myself for next year to speak about this item, on this subject. But the figure of Seneca from Cordoba, like Picasso's family, his fati amore, his giving himself to destiny, tells us a lot about what Picasso is proposing. And Levan left at this Lebrun, the front and the side of the Seneca is here, because we know that this was not Seneca. They look alike to the bust of Picasso. I don't know if Picasso got to know this. So there is a connection, white shade, the eye, the mouth, between this figure and the monster that is reproduced at a later time with works where he represents with a double face and naked to call back his works from his youth, where being nude had a symbolist content related to the thought of the artist and to the Platonic thought at the same time. But the monster comes back, and he comes back in 25. And is recorded in the figure face with the gender sliding. The masculine genitalia is inscribed in this figure front and side, kiss and encounter in a threefold face. The sliding of gender to the Balder convention were also present in the painting of Picasso at that point. And obsessively, Picasso proposes the face, the doubled face from the compulsion of repetition, converting it into an ideogram, to the point that in some of these works we realize that Picasso, that seems spontaneous, has precised a lot, has been very specific in his sketchbook what he wanted to paint. Like if necessarily he wanted to manufacture the ideogram, the psychogram, living in like proposed beforehand, so it will become something different, but it will be well situated. Calling through Jacob, an expert in occultism, the figure of the complementation of the two sexes in one single work. So there is a compulsion of repetition through the psychogram, until in 27 we have a variation. In this sketchbook, Anil Cox has already revealed the relevance of his sketchbooks. he calls the monster. He mentions the monster, but he does something very important. The monster and the Harlequin become the monstrous figure. And this is registered not only in a drawing with Pierrot and the Harlequin, but also in the preparation works for a picture, a painting. Neil knows about it because he's in the Metropolitan. Metropolitan doesn't lend them to us, where Picasso makes the Harlequin become a monster and introduces shade, recovering it in his figure, because there is no monster without a shade and no shade with no monster. Picasso is redefining his works on the 20s. The Harlequins, the classic and Cubist Harlequins, and now he's submitting them to a transformation until they become monster figures. But if they are really, if the Harlequins, the alter ego of Picasso, and the monster figure and the shade have become Harlequins, the monster figure, we're interested in, that cannot be only a feminine figure. It can also be a masculine figure, and Picasso himself. And here is the basis of the psychogram. The psychogram is a meaning waiting, is a significant that is moving on his meaning. There is not only and the replica that's expressed through the profile, and in opposition to the MoMA, we could see it really that the profile could be the one of Picasso, and in figures that express his duality in gender. So there is a connection between the monster figure, the eye that looks at you, the vagina dentata as a mouth, and Harlequin has something feminine and something masculine at the same time in his transformation. And again, the compulsion of repetition, repeating the ideogram one again and again and again, until seeing what you can go, you can reach where you can get to, until the psychogram gets into the atelier of the artist and it becomes a reference that is marking his works. In this sense, we go back to Bouguereau. In his Declaration of the Madre de Sayas in 23, one of the little painters that he mentions, Bouguereau, that would be the academic painting Pompier, the maximum one, the paradigmatic representation of the Pompier painting. But Picasso looks at this painting. Why? Because Bouguereau and Picasso, despite the difference in time, they are in the same space, psychically speaking, of the patriarchal culture. Therefore, their fears and their anguishes are the same. Picasso and Bouguereau is not seeing whether it's academic or not. He's reading the presence of the Iranians, the sense of the guilt. But from there, what we can think is a third interpretation, that these works represent fear, horror, the figure of the Harlequin that melts, but also guilt. That it comes out in this duality. I had a small video. How did it work in Picasso? But time goes by, and we are running out of time, so we will show the video another occasion. So we can see that when Picasso creates these other compositions, where the profile and the monstrous figure appear together, we can see that we are talking about the scopic pulsions and the specular look. When the shade looks at the monster looks at the shade. It's like if they were looking at each other in a mirror. They are looking to themselves because they create a duality. They are not separate figures. And then we can have the possibility of the monster concentrating through the double faces in the figure. In the feminine figure is the third or fourth possibility. It can be a feminine figure of the Picasso monster. It can be a psychogram figure, the psychogram and the significance and weighted meaning. It can be based on, in the Monsieur d'Avignon, it can also represent a hysterical woman. But then I would like to say, Diego, I always talk about Lacan, but she would tell me off. Well, Lacan says the hysterical woman questions the landlord he's insatisfied with. He can be misogynistic, Lacan. He can be criticized. British feminism in the 70s were very much base in Lacan. But Lacan invested two terms in feminine hysteria. It emerges because hysterical women feel they have been misled, and they don't want to submit to their Lord, and they want to know the place and what's the place and what. And the disciple of Lacan once was a woman, and what's her place in that world that always places me in a secondary place. So Picasso paints a hysterical woman. Maybe we could consider it not as a kind that the man that suffers bad-tempered woman, but something is happening there, and something resonates there. And that's my Picasso monumentalizes the figure of the monster and takes it to represent it in his atelier like if it was the Demoiselle d'Avignon, while he goes into the search of psychograms, the pure one, a pure psychogram that curiously would be elevated by Jethro Stein and the reactors and the transition editors, Williams and Joyce, to a representation of the time they were living, as they were reading it as something mysterious that would reveal a truth, not as we read it currently. And the compulsion of repetition continued. The evocation of the Demoiselle d'Avignon and the representation of the past also. And what happens is that after this parkour, which is a fast one, the polysemia of the sign is what works in Picasso. The heterodoxy is in the basis of his painting, and that there is a Picasso that is a plural one that can represent psychogram, the splitted eye, the eternal feminine, the guilt, the African, the mask, the African art, and the anguish of the creation. That's why Picasso, when he converted the face, we're interested in psychogram, he could take it to his big masterpieces like Guernica and make it the center of the suffering. And 27 left. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eugenio, for this magnificent lecture. Now there will be a brief encounter between Eugenio Carmona and Neil Cox to deepen more, if possible, in the aspects of each other's conferences. We take the opportunity to tell you that the last session of this seminar will take place next Wednesday with the participation of our artistic director, Miguel López Remiro, and the professor of the Trinity College of Hartford and director of research of Faban Fitzgerald. We hope this encounter is as interesting as the two conferences we have had today. Thank you. Okay, Neil, hysterical cruelty, monsters. I don't know how the public stood so much. Hello, well, the hystericals, the monsters, hello, I'm talking. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, the hystericals, the theater of cruelty, the hysterical, the monster, what an evening. The public had stood us, I don't know why, but has been able to cope with it, the public, the audience. is about the convulsive aspect of the work of Picasso. Is it working? More or less. Hello, hello, better now? Better now? Okay.
I didn't understand everything you said because of that. Ah, it's getting better, thank you. Whoever turned this up, thank you. Okay. Say it again.
No, bueno.
Well, I repeat, but we are in the same. I say that this convulsive aspect in the work of Picasso, the theater of cruelty, the relationship with the monster. When this museum was founded, there were a need for pedagogy. We have to explain Picasso to ancients, to children, to people from the villages, from the city. So there was a stage in which it was a consecrated artist that was very well known in the market. It was in all collections, but it seems that it was coming here and it had to be explained continuously. And I was suffering when I had to explain a decapitated look of a painter, so they realize sometimes he's conflictive. Well, Maria Jose and some others have to go in a difficult situation sometimes when explaining their works, but this is something that normal. He's always under the sign of Saturn. So what do you think? Sometimes he's subjected to this drama.
His work, and I think Picasso only can get happy when he was an old man, no, dancing with Jacqueline, no, after the camera of David Douglas Duncan, no. What's your opinion with about this dramatic Picasso?
So, okay, so if I follow you, which I'm not sure I do, I guess that at the level of the general public, there's no question that the figure of Picasso is a cultural site. It's a site of a place where many different, I suppose, cultural questions are continuously being played out, reinvented. The museum's incredibly busy all the time. And it seems that for some people, you know, it's a journey through a set of historical narratives or whatever. But for others, there are compulsive pictures. And you see this in the museum when you walk around. So I was interested in your talk, focusing on one picture. And that compulsion that picture has for you. I think that particular picture, can we get it back? Can we get your picture back? Your the one you were speaking about? I don't know.
No lo sé si se puede volver a poner o no.
I don't know how easy it is to get it back. Not mine.
Este vale, este
your one,
bueno.
Your one.
No, pero este está perfecto, ¿no?
It's your one I want, not mine.
No, but that's perfect.
No, I suppose I was thinking about quite a lot of things you said about that picture and its compulsion for you, right? So that why it is that picture you found so significant, you know, to follow a journey, a visual journey through that picture. I don't know if we can get it back. But its structure is incredibly complicated, actually. And at one level, you were speaking about the question of its gender, and you were speaking about it as a psychogram, as a set of signs.
Sure.
But it's also an object that, going back to what I was talking about, going between being an object and a thing, or an object and a person, it does that as well, that one. And I was going to try to talk about that, but I don't know if we can get it back.
It's here.
Fantastic. Okay.
She's coming for you.
What I mean is, okay, so when we see this object, what we immediately grasp, what we immediately see is the eyes, the teeth. The eyes and the teeth, the kind of weird, death's head form or something. That's what we see. Then maybe we notice these lines and we notice this form. Yes? But at the same time, and you were speaking about this, about shadow and light, that it has a whole set of other forms in it. So the white semicircle, this thing which is a bit like a carpenter would use, like a set square. And then those lines there underneath. So we've got the curve, but then these geometric lines here. So I guess that the interplay between those forms, to me are very striking and are part of this weird play between things and people. And what I wanted to ask you about, is I suppose whether you think that what we're seeing is a person or an enormous sculpture or an enormous object. I don't know how big this thing is. Is it tiny? Is it huge? Is it very small? Because it's not, it's not obvious how large or small such a strange configuration is. And I don't know to what extent that connects to the psychogram. Because the psychogram implies something like a message that we can read. So we can read its forms, but I'm uncertain as to what we are really seeing. Are we seeing a head? Like your head, a rethought? Or are we seeing some enormous thing or some tiny thing or some, imaginary creature, object somewhere? Do you understand what I mean? It's the ambiguity of what we see.
Creo que sí, que puedo entenderte. Evidentemente
Evidently, I would prefer to talk more about you than of myself. You are our guests, and many of the people here know me very well, and the students might be fed up with me. I would like to talk more about you. When I read this text of Carl Einstein and the terms of psychogram and psychography that he never explains very well, but he just goes briefly into them. Rapidly, I started working in German psychology, in contemporary psychology, what is the concept of psychogram, and it exists very much, and is used to represent personality. Sometimes human resources directors would miss their employees to tests from which they make a psychogram of strengths and weaknesses, how they can act. It is applied in the teaching world with conflictive students, they make a psychogram with an arc, with pictures, so that the teacher coming the next year have a report of what are their psychological features. So none of these concepts had to do with what Einstein was saying. I can read very, very little German. Reading Einstein in German is very complex. I do translations of those texts. And in reality, what he wanted to say, not only in regard with Picasso, but especially with Picasso, that he's representing graphisms, ineffable, that don't have concrete meaning, but it's such a suggestion that cannot come from anywhere else, that is articulated from the psyche, that it responds to a demand. In the scope of surrealism, that should be automatic writing. But Picasso, in his notebooks, makes sketches of these figures and don't take them to the canvas. And I think this is why I'm fascinated by your conference, and I'm very perplexed in the positive sense, is because I think this is a continuity of the theater of cruelty. Do you understand? I think that is a representation of something terrible, which is that human nature, like it or not, there is a deep cruelty. And this is what you have explained. And that's cruelty defined as so much as you know, as the goodwill. And it's something, but cruelty comes from the animal kingdom, where cruelty doesn't exist, except in the case of some wolves, it doesn't exist. So it's only a question of survival. So we humans interpret that as cruelty. So that's the question. And I don't know if I replied to your question.
So the animality. We are all animals, as well as being human animals. And I suppose that if one's to think about cruelty in nature is only visible to us, right, as cruelty. We don't think of it as cruelty. If we're thinking about one animal, devouring another or something, to us it appears cruel, right? It's maybe, for someone like Otto, it's just another expression of this turbulence of life. It's a bit like an idea in Schopenhauer or Nietzsche, I think, that there's an endless struggle and negativity of suffering in nature, and we're part of nature. I guess that with these things, you talked quite a lot about expression, about the expressive character of these kinds of paintings. And going back to this point about the impact of certain works by Picasso, the question is, where is that expression? In the Einstein narrative, the psychogram is like it's an emanation of a response to a need to express something, as if in a way that's quite a straightforward, the artist has a thought or a feeling and expresses it model. I'm Picasso, I'm having a thought or a feeling, I have a need to express it, I produce this thing. I don't believe that. I actually think that the expressive character of the work is in the work, and it's not a function of the artist's need, desire, feeling, or whatever. It's actually a function of producing these visual configurations and constantly exercising them, which is kind of what you showed. There's a constant, you know, pushing all the time of configurations. So you can end up being able to do this. And when we see a thing like this, we see something shocking, frightening and monstrous. But Picasso might have been in a good mood that day. You know, he might have been quite happy.
Sí, efectivamente.
You know what I mean?
Certainly, certainly.
Feeling, yeah.
Sí. No, perdona que te...
Sorry to have interrupted you, but it's true what you say. And I've had to go very quickly because we are working on the museum in that subject. So I get tired. My museum mates have seen it many times, and I have said it in 1 second. And I should have, in 1925, Picasso in the summer is painting the sacrifice, the torture of the time he's spending with his father, sexualized figure, and the photo of the summer in Juan Lepin. He says that he's enjoying a lot, he loves Olga, and Paula was enchanting, that the beach was delicious. So I think either photographs are from Instagrams and they lie, or that there's just this divorce or this reality that Picasso knows he's a creator, and as a creator he's representing signs, symbols and icons that have to do with the work and sometimes affect his private life and sometimes do not. I'm painting and I'm really happy and I'm not tormented. It's a creation and you are really right about it.
Talked so long, I don't know if anybody here needed to ask a question because we're very boring.
Sí, una pregunta. Sí, yo creo que lo mejor te lo iba a decir.
Yes, I think the best is to give the floor to the public.
They've had
¿Quieres
enough.
preguntar? No. Creo que los hemos aterrado con la crueldad y el...
I think we have terrified him with the cruelty and the monster.
I have no question. And I don't think I have no question because both of you did such a marvelous job in explaining your ideas and allowing us to learn a little more about how to look at some of Picasso's work. So thank you very much. Solamente quería decir que
I only wanted to say that I don't have any questions because these two people, these two experts, in my opinion, have explained it so well that I have been absolutely impressed by how to learn from them under a new perspective on some of the works of Picasso. Thank you so much.
It's kind of you, and I will pay you later.
I wanted to ask you all this subject about compulsion of constantly creating in this repetition. How does it come from? What does someone pushes, like being like mad, repeating one thing every now and again, and where does this compulsion comes for?
It's an interesting one. Well, we know that Picasso was a very ambitious artist. But I think that's not sufficient because lots of artists were ambitious. I think the difference seems to be, or the reason why this kind of constant churning of imagery happens is because Picasso has nothing else to do in his life. His life is this, that's it. That's what he does, and he inhabits it, you know, in a way that I probably think few others have done, at least in terms of the quantity. That's definitely true, the quantity of stuff that Picasso produced. So it's one of the difficult things of trying to cut through and find some argument, which we were both sharing that problem, that you know, that amazing drawing that you showed, one of the drawing for Mercure, of this monstrous woman with, you said, Medusa hair and so on. And what was fantastic about that drawing was not only that it was monstrous and it was a convincing precedent in some way for the mouth and so on in some of these paintings, but also that she's lying on a chaise longue in that drawing and holding a glass of wine. Right? So, and this is very typical of a sort of combination sometimes of absolutely shocking. I mean, I use that word in my talk, but they are kind of shocking. That's a shocking picture. And it's the sort of, it will stop you in your tracks. You see a thing like that. You turn a corner in a gallery and see something like that. It's not a pleasant, it's not a beautiful experience. But he also, all the time, makes things ridiculous and comic, and says there are so many oscillations like that that make it difficult to grasp. I think those oscillations are partly to do with a sort of life turbulence, so that, you know, I'm trying to think who used the phrase, I think it was Picasso, the mobility of thoughts. It's a sort of like that, it's like a constant. So our consciousness is constantly going in and out of focus. I could see you all going out of focus when I was talking. You're all thinking about something else. It's very hard for our minds to hold. And Picasso does hold all the time to drawing and painting all the time, sculpting all the time, right? But at the same time, there's always a flux and a flow of thoughts, and as you said, sort of natrachly, you know, kind of circling back and all these sorts of things. So it's, I don't know why it happens other than that. He lives inside that, you know, and so everybody else is kind of expendable in his life because this is his life, the drawing and the painting.
Sí, yo creo que Picasso, después de pintar estas figuras a las que he llamado monstruos,
I think Picasso, after painting these figures that he called monsters, well, it's like when people younger than me, The Walking Dead, they say they watch this series, zombies and everything, all these kind of things, when they go to the fair and they go in tunnels of fears and they have a good time with the fear. And that's a reason. Picasso was an artist, and he knew that he was an artist, and he had a hunger, and he knew that dramatism was something that is convulsion, that creates convulsion, and that he knew how to manage that rhetoric perfectly. And that's why, even if we cannot almost talk about this forbidden, he had the bulls and the bullfighting. He was very dramatic, and he was going beyond the arena. He was just not describing. He was interested by the drama and how the drama has no explanation. But together with that, this rhetoric of the artist, knowing that the dramatic element is attractive, I read one of these help books when there was a marriage, an American marriage couple. We had an American lady with us in the public, and nearly his wife, a British, fortunately. But they were waiting to see an exhibition in the Grand Palais of Bonnard. And why are we wasting time so long just in this? Because it's very beautiful. There's many colors, colorful things you can see everywhere. But he always painted the same models. Always painting the same model. Yes, but his model was his lover and became ill, and she deteriorated. And he continued to paint her like if she was young and fresh. Oh, that's very interesting, he said, the husband. So when there is drama, there is an interest. And seeing the happiness of living is more difficult, because since in transcendent and superfan drama is attractive. In any case, if I have 1 minute, I would like to tell you that there is something in my personal training has a big influence in my way of thinking. I need to use in one point for which I did a training, I did many studies, and with this training related to psychology, I believe that Picasso had, and Servos, who knew him really, said he had a special relationship with desire. Desire is something that we all censor to ourselves. But when desire, I mean the sexual portion, because desire can be many things. It can be can be the will of living. But Picasso, for any reason, he didn't censor himself. He was able to live it with intensity, with the mystery that attracted him. And the desire, the sexual pulsion has something wonderful, but it has a monster in itself as well, with the relationship with the bodies, with themselves, the emptying of your own body, the la petite mort, like the French, to the climax stage. So, and this is this overwhelming feeling of that person living in so intensity that takes him to that way compulsively of creating, of repeating. So at the end of the day, compulsion, we will never know why it happens. Somebody will need to go to treatment for a long time, to therapy, to get to a compulsion, to be agreed with their own subject, to give themselves to an explanation. But maybe it's not the right one, because maybe it's a biological reason. So it's a mixture of the two. A rhetoric as an artist, and the capacity to live intensively the life and the pulsion that takes him to that unstoppable working, and that ends up in cruelty in a peculiar manner. And I think is a modern practice that couples sit to watch a series at night, and romantic ones have the same tone. Before we see some dead people, some shots, some heads that explode, we can watch some kidnapped girls that drown, that die, and then we go to bed. How can we go to bed like that? Well, our mind sees that, and we sleep so well. Because there is a sort of freedom, liberation of the forces that at the end of the day is there. Any other question?
We could ask people whether they can sleep after such a film, but anyway, I don't think everybody can, but yeah.
Yes, thank you. My question, the image that you kept returning to, the cyclogram, I'm from Chicago. We have an image exactly like that. It's 4 stories tall, Corten steel sculpture, but it comes much later. This is 1967, I think, than the images that that you showed us today. Did Picasso revisit that image continuously, or is the Chicago sculpture a throwback to an older time for him? You understand? I'm asking, was this a continuous thing through all those years, or was the sculpture, which is his only sculpture, like a throwback, a memory of something from the 20s and 30s?
His only sculpture in Chicago, you mean, on a public, the big public monument? You meant only sculpture in that sense? Yes, yeah. Because it relates to what I was saying about how big is that head. You know, it's possible things can be massive monuments and you don't know, because where is the reference of scale? I mean, that particular sculpture relates also to projects for the monument for Apollinaire and other things that happened in the 20s and into the 30s, in fact, you know, which all failed. But there are lots of different strands in the work in terms of thinking about the figure and its representation sculpturally. So talk about transparency, for example, as well as scale. And I think that, you know, you can see them cross over with some of these small figure paintings, but those particular things, you know, started with cardboard sculptures of bodies and faces, so that they're sort of coming in a different time. And you know, I shocked somebody by talking about an exhibition of Picasso I saw recently. I said some of that wasn't very good, right? So Picasso produced so much stuff and at so many different times that there are lots of things that I think are probably less interesting than others. And it also has to do with what you were talking about I guess, all the external forces around Picasso, and particularly later on, like post-45 and into the 50s and things, of the question of your own relevance and importance. You know, sort of a kind of self-mythification, but at the same time, there's a lot of other stuff happening around you, which is new and different. And I think that was a problem as well. So trying to do that great public monument was a great kind of way of marking his importance in that way too.
Well, we are beyond the time. We are running out of time, but answering your question, because we're outside time, so Pachi won't tell me off because I love Pachi. And I see that he's looking at me dearly, and we want to meet the times. When Picasso did the Chicago sculpture, he fulfilled one of his big dreams, because as Mr. Neil pointed out, many of these works were projects for monuments, many of these works. I didn't care putting these figures that we see as monstrous, and maybe he did it as a big monument. What translation can we give to that? In his house, he had in the garden one of these pieces of the little ones that he could do with Curo Gonzalez in the forge. My answer, why? Could he convert? What did he convert that into a monument? If that figures, because maybe we're wrong, but if they had something about a monster or the like, because in Picasso, deeply rooted, there's a certain culture within him, and I'm very moderate in giving these answers. I don't like to give these answers lightly, but I understand that they come from my own cultural context. And as translator of Picasso, I cannot separate myself from the post-colonial, the place of enunciation, the place from where I speak as post-colonialist, and others speak from another place. We live in a city, and our city neighbors, the neighboring cities, we get the body of a man bleeding on parade, on a cross, and we applaud. So that idea of suffering, the extreme suffering, is a symbolic idea that's very powerful, and the masses maintain that during time, and proving that in time is part of and the woman that weeps in Seville of the parade, they need to have like real tears, the virgins. She's suffering, she's crying, and it's unbearable, and people scream at her, "You're beautiful, you're beautiful, you're beautiful." So in Picasso, referring to the culture of pain, of suffering, there's all that involved. In the square of Merced, where he was born, there was the Church of the Merced. It's a building that has been renovated, and that church was caught fire. And in some of the political programs, when they told Picasso, and this documented, the Church of La Merced had burned, he said, "What a shame. How many times I went there with my mom." And nobody expects that. And that's what he answered. So there's something enormously many things many things have been written about religious paintings, and he has a deep connection with the iconography. There is something deep within of his Mediterranean Catholic culture that makes him different from the French culture, and of course from the Anglo-Saxon culture that hasn't got this kind of inclinations. So when you see a monument that can be a monster, is something. I don't know how people in Chicago consider this, because Chicago is a wonderful city with wonderful museums, and our collections out of belief, and sometimes it's very warm and sometimes it's very cold there, extreme weather. And when I saw it, it was so cold. I was wearing all my clothes, and it was a real show. Big show, was something amazing. Living with that late today must be, well, I don't know how it must be, but Picasso wanted to do this monument sculptures. That was what Neil, sorry. I would like you to close this day and with some words for our public, because we're running out of time.
Well, my words are to thank you all for staying with us, those who stayed. Oops, now I can't hear anything. Thank you all for staying with us. You know, I think once I managed to hear you, I hope we had a good conversation and very much enjoyed being here with you. That's all I want to say for now. Yeah, goodbye.